Have you ever had that gnawing feeling that there must be more? You have so many great things in your life, but you're still not satisfied? My guest today says that was her reality, but following that desire has led to incredible meeting, but also incredible pain. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Cheryl.
This isn't going to be one of these like tied up in a bow, perfect, simple stories, is it?
No, it's not.
So you had this longing for more, and that led you to where?
Well, it led me first away from what all the more was. You know, all the more was corporate America, was buying new homes, was living that life that we're all told, you know, is success. You know, the first step was leaving that. And then the next step was just this abyss of not knowing why and what's the purpose in that. And through that hunger, through that ache, through that crying out to God, that's when I found the real more. And the real more was finding that unique reason for which I was born. And it ended up leading to an Esther moment for me of a solidity and understanding this is why I was born. And this is why none of the more mattered until now.
So you ended up moving your family to Spain. You were helping out there. Heard about an orphanage across the border in Portugal that you could help at. Saw it was run down, so you're renovating this orphanage, but then you discovered there's something else going on. What did you find?
Yeah, you know, in my gut, there was just this, I call it the Holy Spirit. It was just jumping up and down. I knew something was wrong, but I never fathomed what that something wrong was. I was hoping it was just lack of education, lack of resources, and so we were trying to help, but finally a little boy came to me. He was about 6 years old, and he was jumping from foot to foot, and he called me Auntie Kimberly, and he was asking for the Vaseline, and I was like, Fabio, why do you need the Vaseline? And the long and short story of that was Fabio, along with the other 19 African immigrant children in that home, were being forced into prostitution and child pornography.
That must have been a moment of incredible horror.
It was. And it was not long that after that moment, from that moment, I understood, because it's the fight for those children's freedom began. That's where I understood this is why I'm on this planet. This is why my life matters.
I know that feeling. I've had that overseas as well. And so you start for 2 years, you're fighting to get these kids out, and it wasn't as easy as you would think. What did you learn in that process? It took 2 years.
It took 2 years. I learned that evil will do anything, include threatening to kill my children. We had to send our daughters back to the U.S. to keep them safe. The trafficker threatened to not only take my daughters, but when that didn't work, to kill my daughters. And so I learned evil will stop at nothing. Most of us, we will stop. We will be backed down. And God was just the strength in that just allowed us to take the right next step. The picture was so big and so overwhelming that all we could really see is, well, what's the right next thing? And the right next thing was certainly not to abandon those children. And so we kept our daughters in the U.S. for a period of time while we stayed and fought that case. It did take 2 years. And I think the saddest thing that I learned was finally, because of the government being complicit in the problem and actually using a lot of these children, very high-ranking officials, I think the saddest thing was there was no real justice. While eventually that home was closed down and those children were taken out, they were just recycled back into the same system because they were sent back to the same shanty towns from which they had been taken originally. So there was no real justice, and that's when I knew we have to go to the root. We have to try to do prevention. Where are these children being taken from? Why are they being taken? Why is it so easy to get them? And what can we do to prevent that?
And that led you, of course, to many different places where you were fighting trafficking, but in particular, you kept hearing about Sudan and South Sudan, that was an incredible place of trauma for people to be trafficked because of war.
Exactly.
Tell me about your first trip there.
My first trip, a great friend, I can say his name now. When I wrote my book, Passport Through Darkness, I was not allowed to reveal his name because he was working undercover with Voice of the Martyrs. So I just call him PJ in the book. But he ended up going to prison in Sudan for almost 2 years because he was working, well, not far outside of one of our orphanages, and they arrested him. But my first trip in with him in, I believe, 2004 was because he kept telling me, Kimberly, what you're doing to help the women and children in the sewers of Bucharest, Romania, or Transnistria, Moldova, it's really good, But if you want to go to the worst place, if you really want to reach the women and children who are the most vulnerable and have absolutely no resources, then you'll go to Sudan. But I was scratching my head and thinking, isn't there like a really bad war with rape and genocide going on? I don't really want to go, but for over a year, he kept just kind of nudging me. And I think my first trip in, I really went just sort of on a bucket list, checking off, okay, I'll go, then Peter will leave me alone and I'll never have to go again.
Okay, we want to hear about that, and we're going to hear about that, and also some of the great things and the really hard things that happened to you. That's when we come back.
Okay.